Well, thank you everyone for being here tonight. We have several who are out this evening and had several this morning as well. We hope that those who are ill will improve in their health over the next little while, and we certainly are glad that you're here and hope that you remain healthy as the seasons change and maybe some sickness flares up as a result of that. There's many reasons I respect Sladen, but one of those is he's a man who knows his limitations. I asked him to help me with the sign out front, so he brought me a ladder. He knows when he can help and when he can't, right? I wish I could say the same about my wife. Of course, she's still not feeling incredibly well, and she scheduled groceries to be picked up. She went to Kroger's and picked them up, and so she was gone when I left to come to services this afternoon. And my Bronco was gone. She had taken my Bronco because it was pretty outside, and it rained on her. And I don't believe in karma, but the Bible does say what you sow, you reap. And so, she took that, and the top was down. It was beautiful. She enjoyed the afternoon, and then she had to put the top up because it was raining. So that brought me satisfaction that it shouldn't have. But I do hope she continues to get better. She feels better tonight, but still is coughing a whole lot, and so please remember her. This morning we talked about moral purity, and we delved into that topic and many aspects of it. And as I was preparing for that sermon, I was also reading through the book of Genesis, and the events surrounding Lot really struck me as something that could illustrate some of the points that we were talking about this morning. You see, what happened to Lot really was about moral purity, or the lack thereof. And Lot, in my estimation, made some grave errors in judgment relative to where he positioned himself, what he surrounded himself with, the emphasis that he placed on material things. And those decisions negatively affected his family. And I'll submit to you this evening that if we're not careful, if we don't make sure the battle lines are clearly drawn between us and the sins of the world and the impact that the world can have on us and the influences of the world, we can face similar dangers to what Lot faced. And so we're going to use Lot this evening as an illustration of purity. And you can go ahead and open your Bibles to Genesis chapter 13 tonight. Genesis chapter 13. And we'll start there by noticing the criteria. You might be familiar with what happened. Lot and Abram amassed impressive herds and an impressive amount of people to tend those herds and to take care of all of the day-to-day chores in their households. And their groups became so large that there began to be strife. In Genesis chapter 13, it says in verse number 5, Lot also, which went with Abram, had flocks and herds and tents. Now that's interesting, by the way. We don't need to breeze through Genesis 13:5 where it says Lot also, which went with Abram. If you go all the way back to Genesis chapter 12 and verse 1, it says, Now the Lord had said unto Abram, Get thee out of thy country, and from thy kindred, and from thy father's house, unto a land that I will show thee. He told him to leave his family. And what immediately happens in verse 4, So Abram departed as the Lord had spoken unto him, and Lot went with him. Have you ever found that interesting? God said, leave your family, and Lot went with him. I've always found that to be quite interesting. Why did Lot go when Abram said, leave your family? But anyway, Lot has hitched his wagon to Abram's star. And so here they are, and in verse 6, The land was not able to bear them, that they might dwell together, for their substance was great, so that they could not dwell together. Any of you who are involved in rearing cattle or any sort of animals of any type, you understand that there's only so many heads of cattle that a land can take. And whether you're talking about cattle, sheep, whatever the case might be, there's only so much that one parcel of land can support. And so both of these individuals had grown so massive in their operations that they could not dwell in close proximity to each other. And because of the push and pull of water sources and food sources and shelter sources, there began to be strife. between Abram and his men and Lot and his men. And Abram, being the godly man that he was, in verse 8, he says, "Let there be no strife, I pray thee, between me and thee, between my herdmen and thy herdmen, for we be brethren. Is not the whole land before thee? Separate thyself, I pray thee, from me. If thou wilt take the left hand, I'll go to the right. If thou depart on the right hand, then I will go to the left." They find themselves in a position, if you can see the call out there, in the region of Bethel and Ai is where they had both situated themselves. And the problem, as we said, was that the land in that particular area couldn't hold all of their men and all of their cattle and all of the things that they needed to do. And it said that there to the east of Bethel, between Bethel and Ai, which is where Abram set up his camp, that there's a hill. And if you got up on that hill and you looked to the east towards Jordan, you could see the beautiful, fruitful plains of Jordan. And it was right there in your horizon every time you got up on that hill. Well, Abram said, "You take whatever land you want, and I'll take the other." Well, what happened? In the course of time, in verse 9, Abram said, "Is not the whole land before thee? Separate thyself, I pray thee, from me. If thou take the left hand, I'll go to the right. If thou depart to the right hand, I'll go to the left." And Lot lifted up his eyes, and he makes a decision. So Lot has free choice of whatever part of ground that he wants. Whatever place geographically he wants to go, that's where he can go. And of course, Lot, as he lifts up his eyes in verse 10, he beheld all the plain of Jordan, that it was well watered everywhere, before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, even as the garden of the Lord. I want you to notice the wording, even as the Garden of Eden. That's how lush and beautiful and fruitful that land was. And if you were Lot, put yourself in his shoes. You get up on this hill, you survey that whole beautiful, fruitful land, and you say, "My family can prosper in that land. I can rear a family. I can grow a business. I can help to satisfy the needs of a household in that land." But there's a problem, isn't it? Those are the only criteria by which Lot decided where he was going to go. He only judged with his eyes. From a physical standpoint, from a worldly standpoint, the plains of Jordan had everything he could ever want, everything he could ever need and imagine. From a professional standpoint, it was the right decision. But there's just one small problem with what was going on here. Look at verse 13 of Genesis 13. "But the men of Sodom were wicked and sinners before the Lord exceedingly." You know what Lot didn't check out? He didn't check out the neighborhood. See, the land was great. It was fertile. It was beautiful. It was fruitful. It was everything that he could ever imagine. If you could paint a picture, it wouldn't be any better than that. But the people were wicked, sinful, and they were everything that Lot didn't need his family to be around. You see, Lot did not investigate the spiritual condition of the land. He didn't judge based on spiritual things, but only on physical things. You and I, we spend so much time as parents trying to give our children every physical advantage. We want them to be a part of every good event that goes on with their friends and their school and their church and their community. We want them to try every sport that comes down the pike. We buy them all of the best things. We want them when they get older to go to all of the best schools, and we want them to choose the best profession that can help them financially and all of those things. We're so concerned about their health. We take them to the dentist. We get them braces. We do all of these things to help them physically. But if we're not careful, all of those things can get in the way of what's most important, their spiritual lives. And we sacrifice, if we're not careful, the things which are best for them spiritually in favor of the things that are best for them physically. In Colossians chapter 3, we're told to set our affections on things above, not on the things on this earth. And there's no time in which that's more vitally important than when we're rearing children. We're going through a very interesting time for us as parents. Jordan is trying to decide what he wants to do for the rest of his life. Of course, that's easier said than done. There are some of us who are in our 40s or beyond who don't know what we want to do with the rest of our lives. But Jordan is trying to figure out where he wants to go to school. And somewhere along the way, I don't know if it's because of a test he took or a sign-up sheet that he filled out, he gets mailers from every college in the world. And they've all got these glossy pictures on the front. Florida Gulf Coast University. Sandy white beaches, blue skies, all of these wonderful things. And Jordan's like, that's where I want to go to school. But every time we try to seriously talk about this, one of the things that we try to emphasize is, are there good churches there? Well, what about the student center? Is that a place that can steer you in the right direction? Well, what about your spiritual life there? Well, what do you want to do for a living? There was a time, and I may have told you this, when I dreamed of my kids playing in the NBA. I mean, I don't know if every young parent thinks that. You got a boy, yeah, he's going to be a professional athlete. I wouldn't wish that on my child. The temptations they're saddled with, the opportunities to go astray that would abound in that lifestyle, I wouldn't wish that on them now. You see, it's one thing to want all of these physical blessings for them, but their soul is the most important. Matthew 16:26, what shall it profit a man if he shall gain the whole world and lose his own soul? What shall a man give in exchange for his soul? That's a question that will echo in Lot's life as we see moving forward. So Lot only considered the physical. He did not investigate the spiritual condition of where he was taking his family. And it's going to be disastrous. Number 2, the conflict. It's not long at all, until Lot suffers the consequences, begins to suffer the consequences of making this particular decision. You see, in Genesis chapter 14 and verse 1, it came to pass in the days of Amraphel, king of Shinar, Arioch, king of Elasar, Kedor Laomer, king of Elam, and Tidal, king of nations, that these made war with whom? Bera, king of Sodom, and Bersha, king of Gomorrah, Shinab, king of Admah, and Shemeber, king of Zeboim, and the king of Bela, which is Zoar. So here is Lot in this fruitful, beautiful land. And now he's going to find himself wrapped up in the middle of war. It goes on. As you look at verse 11 and 12, so the one group goes against the other group. There's this league of nations going against this league of nations. And guess who gets caught up in the middle? Verse 11. And they took all the goods of Sodom and Gomorrah and all their victuals and went their way. And verse 12 says, and they took Lot, Abram's brother's son, who dwelt in Sodom, and his goods, and departed. Lot said, hey, this is the best place for me to be. This is the best professional situation for me to be in. The land is the most fruitful. I'll be able to rear all of my family here. I'll be able to have all my sheep and all my cattle, and all of this stuff will be perfect. But he didn't count the cost spiritually. And he began to associate with the people of Sodom and Gomorrah, and just merely by association, now he's taken captive. He didn't plan on that when he pitched his tent towards Sodom. And already he has unintended consequences. In 2 Corinthians chapter 10, Paul writes, for though we walk in the flesh, we do not war after the flesh. The weapons of our warfare are not carnal, but mighty through God to the pulling down of strongholds, casting down imaginations, and every high thing that exalteth itself against the knowledge of God. You see, what Lot didn't count on was that he had a big enough battle to fight spiritually. He didn't need to get involved in all these physical confrontations. You see, Abram said, I'm going to go dwell over there. And Lot, by putting himself right in the middle of the world, he got caught up in the unintended consequences of what the world had to offer. And if we're not careful, we're going to get caught up in all of the battles of the world if we pitch our tents too close to the things that go on there. There are a whole lot of things going on in the world right now that I don't want any part of. I don't want my family caught up in them. I don't want people I love caught up in them. And the less I know about those things, the better off I am as far as I'm concerned. But Lot got swept up in the problems of the world. He got dragged into a worldly war. Paul tells Timothy in 2 Timothy chapter 2 that a good soldier doesn't entangle himself in the affairs of this life. And unfortunately, Lot did just that. And he got caught up, physically got caught up. Now, Abram came to his defense. He saved Lot. And God is always on Abram's side as Abram does right. God promised him that. I'll bless him that blessed thee, curse him that curseth thee, and thee shall all nations of the earth be blessed. And Lot needed to thank his lucky stars that he was hooked to Abram's wagon, because it was only because of Abram that he was saved in this instance. And this won't be the only time. So we see that Lot chose only based on the physical criteria. He didn't consider the spiritual consequences. Number two, he got caught up in a worldly war because he pitched his tent towards Sodom. And now the real tragedy strikes. The real consequences come home to roost for Lot and for his family. Genesis chapter 19, you can fast forward all the way there. And maybe you're familiar with the fact that God had decided He was going to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah. He, in fact, comes in representative form to visit Abram and to talk to him about those things. And Abram, in Genesis chapter 18, had bargained and negotiated with God. You pick up in verse 23 of Genesis 18. And Abram drew near and said, wilt thou also destroy the righteous and the wicked? He said, what about 50? What about 40? What about 20? What about 10 righteous? And God said He would not destroy for 10 righteous' sake. We fast forward to chapter 19. Verse 1, there came 2 angels to Sodom and even, and Lot sat in the gate of Sodom. Notice the progression, by the way. In chapter 13, he pitches his tent towards Sodom. By the time we get to chapter 19, he's sitting in the gates there, where business is being done. He's been sucked into the life and the society of Sodom and Gomorrah. In verse 2, he said, behold, now, my lords, turn in, I pray you, into your servant's house, tarry all night, wash your feet, rise up early, and go on your way. And they said, nay, we'll abide in the street all night. He pressed upon them greatly. They turned into him, entered into his house, he made them a feast, did bake unleavened bread, and they did eat. Now, some commentators question, why was Lot so determined to get them into his house? I think number one, he's a good host. A Jew was to be a good host. We recognize that. Abram did the same thing for those that came to visit him. But do you think Lot knew what awaited these men if they stayed in the street? I think there's something to be said for that. Lot knew the kind of people he was associated with now. He knew the kind of people inhabited Sodom and Gomorrah. He knew that. Well, in the process of time, they try to break in and take advantage of the men. Lot even offers his daughters instead, and they refuse. And then in verse 12, the men said unto Lot, hast thou any besides son-in-law, thy sons, thy daughters, whatsoever thou hast in the city, bring them out of this place. For we, verse 13, will destroy this place, because the cry of them is waxen great before the face of the Lord, and the Lord hath sent us to destroy it. So verse 14, this is where it gets really sad. This is where the heartbreaking consequences of Lot's decisions come home to roost. And Lot went out and spake unto his sons-in-law, which married his daughters, and said, up, get you out of this place, for the Lord will destroy this city. But he seemed as one that mocked unto his sons-in-law. Lot went out to try to save his sons-in-law, to preserve the families that his daughters had begun to establish. And they looked at him and they laughed. And Lot had to turn around knowing that they would be destroyed. But of course it doesn't end there. In Genesis 19 and verse 26. Here they are fleeing. God said, no matter what you do, do not look behind you. His wife looked behind her. She became a pillar of salt. Genesis 19 and verse 34. His daughters seduce him because they fear literally the world has ended. There's nobody else besides us. We've got to replenish the race. I wonder where they learned to do the things that they did. It turns out there was nobody in Lot's family unaffected by the impact of Sodom and Gomorrah. Not a single person. He lost his wife, he lost his sons-in-law, and his daughters were obviously affected by the wickedness of Sodom and Gomorrah. If you had asked Lot in Genesis 13, Lot, did you make the right decision? What would he have said? Look at the land. It's a no-brainer. Professionally, this is the best decision that I could make. I'm giving my children every advantage. It's the equivalent of saying they'll have the best home, they'll go to the best schools, they'll have the best education, they'll get the best jobs. But what if you knew that all of those things would be true and they would be lost? Would it be worth it? If you had told Lot in Genesis 13 how it would have turned out, would he have chosen a different land to pitch his tent? I think he would have. I wonder for how many Christian families is it the case that we focus on worldly things 12 hours out of every day? We put such an emphasis on their education, on their physical appearance, on their athletic endeavors, on their social lives, on their educational futures, on their financial futures. And all of those things in and of themselves, they're not bad. But we put our emphasis on all of those things to the detriment of those things that are most important. And I wonder how many of those families 20 years down the road, if you ask them, would you do it all over again? They'd say no. We would have pitched our tent in a different place. We would have had a different emphasis in our lives. We would have reminded our kids every day how important their souls were. And we would have tried to model that better and emphasize that more in the decisions that we made and the things that we talked about and the places we went and the things that we did. I know a whole lot of families who regret putting God second, third, fourth in their lives. I've never met a family who regretted putting God first. I've never met one. Have you? Lot, to me, is an illustration of everything that can go wrong when we buy into the worldly view of success, of comfort, of achievement. When we buy into the world's view of what's best for our families and for ourselves. But I told you Matthew 16:26 would ring throughout Lot's life, and it does. What shall it profit a man if he gains the whole world and loses his own soul? Lot, you're going to lose your wife. You're going to lose your sons-in-law. And your daughters are going to be grievously affected. Lot, was it worth it? I think Lot will tell you no. All of that land, all of those bountiful blessings can't make up for the things that he lost. This evening, what is the focus of your family? What is the most important thing in the lives of your children? What are you emphasizing? What are we emphasizing as we help our children plan their futures? Let's not be Lot and pitch our tent towards Sodom and Gomorrah and neglect to investigate the spiritual consequences of our decisions. Let's maintain God's standard as we spoke of this morning. And let's emphasize that at every turn in our lives as best we can. Maybe this evening your tent is pitched towards Sodom. Maybe this evening you've been living a life dedicated to the world. And maybe you say, well, my life really isn't that bad. I've got the things that I need. I've got the necessities of life. For the most part, I'm pretty happy. Dear friend, what about your soul? Solomon said in Ecclesiastes 12, after exhausting all other modes of happiness, he said, really, you know what happiness is all about? Fearing God and keeping His commandments. It's the whole of man. Are you neglecting your soul tonight? If you have been up until this point, do you believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God? If so, understand that He died, He shed His blood so that you might be saved. Are you willing to repent of your sins? To change your mind and change your life? Are you willing to confess the name of Christ? To put Him on in baptism? To be placed in the church by Jesus Christ Himself, Acts 2:47. Tonight, dear Christian, is God your primary focus? Are you seeking those things which are above? Are you guiding your family in that direction? Or have you lost sight of those things that are most valuable? Have you pitched your tent toward Sodom even now? What will it cost you? What will it cost your family? Is it worth it? Tonight, obey the gospel to be restored as together we stand and sing.